This is Brannon Howse Live. Whether the issue is law, science, economics, history, family, social issues, education, religion, government, or national security, Brannon brings the issues of the day into clear focus through the lens of a Judeo-Christian worldview. And now, here is your host, Brannon Howse.
And good evening. Welcome to the broadcast on this September 4th, 2025. September 4th, 2025. Joining you here tonight by phone for a few minutes to introduce tonight's broadcast to you. Obviously, I am not doing a broadcast on camera tonight. I wasn't on radio today. I wanted to jump on here and let you know everything is fine. Apparently, when I take a couple days or a day here or there for administrative purposes, people get worried, and I appreciate it. Logan's getting emails. I'm getting emails. Melissa's getting texts and emails. So I said, well, let me jump on, tell everybody everything's fine. Appreciate you guys being concerned. It takes an awful lot behind the scenes to keep this network going. Just paying the bills to keep the network going, the counting, the bookwork, everything we do has to be accounted for. It has to be coded. We have to say, what is that? What's that charge? What's that check for? It all has to be coded for our accountant. And that takes a lot of work, folks. Just what goes on behind the scenes with bookwork and accounting is almost a full-time job. So there are days I have to just stop and get caught up on that so that our CPA is happy and I'm fully caught up and keeping her happy. And then, of course, there are things like right now, today, believe it or not, I was booking the venue for the 2026 National Worldview Weekend. Yeah, I know we haven't even had the 2025 yet, right? And we already booked the venue for next year. We'll tell you where that's going to be held next year, what city we're going to, as you hear Dolly here in the background. And I was even working on booking speakers for that today for 2026. But we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We got to carry out the National Worldview Weekend, 22nd Annual Worldview Weekend for 2025 first. So I was working on all that kind of stuff today, be doing more things tomorrow, and taking a little bit of the time tomorrow to spend with Logan and Melissa and, of course, Dolly. Take a little personal time tomorrow because when we are back in the studio on Monday, it is going to then be a lot between now and the end of the year. So we're going to get a little R&R with Melissa and Logan and Dolly on Friday afternoon and to the evening, and then get ready to go. Now, Friday night, I'm going to have Sharam with me. Friday night, Sharam. I've asked Sharam Hady to sit in and be a guest host on Friday night, and he's booking some great guests to be with you tomorrow night. But then I'll be back on my regular schedule Monday for radio, Worldview Report, TV, and we're going to be busy with also rehearsals for our banquet concert with our piano player, and we've added a classical guitar player. Some of you are going to know who he is. He's a Dove Award-winning, Emmy Award-winning classical guitar player who'll be accompanying me along with our classical and grand piano player, Donna, who's been with us the last few years. I'll do a few numbers for you on that Thursday night for the banquet, and then Hadia Maramonde will be speaking at the banquet on that Thursday night, October 2nd. Tickets and information is available at worldviewstore.com. And then, of course, the conference itself, Friday night and Saturday, October 3rd and 4th, with all the great speakers. I talked to Todd Starnes today, by the way. How many of you know who Todd Starnes is? Well, Todd is a Memphian like us. We live outside of Memphis. He does too. He lives right down the road, by the way. We both live right outside of Memphis. And Todd is going to come and join us at our National Worldview Weekend in Collierville, Tennessee here and greet the crowd either that Friday night or Saturday. He'll greet the crowd, Todd Starnes, who's syndicated, I think it was just the White House broadcasting this week. So Todd will be with us. But I was talking to Todd about it, and we're going to have a great event, and we want you there. Okay, worldviewstore.com to get registered. Saw more people registering today from various parts of the country, worldviewstore.com. And now if you cannot be with us, then you can get 50% of the blessing. And that is, you can live stream it, but you have to have a Vault membership at worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault. So I hope you'll do that. Now, what I want to do right now is pull out of my vault. Speaking of the vault, I want to pull out of the vault a presentation that all of you should watch. In fact, you should tweet, text, email, Facebook, get our Truth Social, get everybody here to watch it. And you could get children to watch it. And let me just say, if you have any friends that you know that are speakers, that are really considering the claims of Christianity, the claims of Christ, this would be a great presentation. This man at one time was the oldest test pilot, and he was still flying. He spoke for me at my Ozarks Worldview Weekend. I don't remember what year this is. It had to be around, I'm guessing, 2007, 2008, somewhere in there, that he was the keynote. Russell O'Quinn. I found out about it because he gave his testimony at Bellevue Baptist Church for Dr. Adrian Rogers. And I heard him and I thought, that is a powerful testimony and story. In fact, his story is so unique. I think it was John Wayne. Maybe he tells you in the presentation, but he told me off the air. John Wayne at one time was talking to him about taking his life story, making it into a movie. But Mr. O'Quinn, being a very devout Christian, it's like, I can't have anybody portraying me that's swearing or drinking. He was very committed. He was not about to sell out to Hollywood unless it was going to be consistent with his values. But you're going to love this story. A guy that almost died a few times and actually had a friend that did. And you'll hear about that tonight. But he has an amazing story, one that really should be made into a movie. But it's a keynote address at my Worldview Weekend in Branson, Missouri. You know, we had it in Branson for many years, then we moved it over to Lake of the Ozarks. But again, this had to be around 2000, I'm going to guess 2007, maybe 2006, 2008, somewhere in there. I could look up the date to let you know, but it was quite a while ago. And I think you should let everybody know about it because everybody's going to enjoy it, whether you're a person of faith, a Christian, or if you know someone that's seeking, that's questioning. You should hear this man's testimony because he was such a person, and you're going to really appreciate his story and testimony, okay? So thank you for that. And again, I just wanted to jump on here and let you know everything's fine, and thank you for being concerned in the emails and the text. But I also want to jump on here and let you know that this is a great presentation coming out of our vault. And by the way, it's a perfect example of the 35 years worth of presentations in this vault. So get some folks here to hear the incredible testimony and life story of Mr. Russell O'Quinn. And then tomorrow night, Shram Hadian will be with you, and then we'll be back on our normal schedule, Monday for radio, Worldview Report, and television, okay? And now here is Mr. Russell O'Quinn.
Would you please join me in welcoming Mr. Russell O'Quinn?
Thank you, man. Now, be honest, how many of you were expecting somebody who looked like Tom Cruise to walk out here? If it'll help your disappointment any, I used to look like Robert Redford. Now, how many of you heard that before, by the way? I can see a few hands, by the way. Well, it still works, so I'm glad. But let me explain a little bit about this anachronism that's standing up here in front of you tonight. There aren't many men at my age that do what I do. There's only about a handful of us that are still at it. They used to mandatorily retire us at an earlier age than this, but they realized in certain circumstances, particularly if you're involved in a sensitive program, if you can continue to pass the physical, perform in your specialty while they're throwing away an awful lot of experience and knowledge. And so I'm one of a few that are still at it. I fly a new generation jet fighter in about 5 specialized missions that we've been very concerned about now in light of what's been happening in Iraq and the Middle East. I fly against Top Gun pilots and red flag pilots on occasion. We have to in order to continually evaluate the ever-changing weapon systems and the maneuvers that go along with them. And it's fun at this age to go out there and tangle with these youngsters of 25 and 30 years old. Sells my ego to have their unit commanders say, don't you go out there and fool with that old man unless you want to get embarrassed. But at any rate, that's a little bit of... That's a little bit of who I am and what I'm doing. They used to, as I said, retire us. They've been doing a study recently, I'll have to tell you this, on us older guys. After World War II, well, they had it pretty much in their mind that by the time you reach 50, you're all done. And now they've been doing some research on some of us older ones, really older ones like me. And they wired us up, and I flew through a whole series of Top Gun maneuvers in a jet fighter and telemetried all of this back to computers. And after it was all over, why, this chief flight surgeon brought me in and gave me their summary. There were about 5 or 6 surgeons around a table, and this is what they said. We don't understand a lot about you older guys. Your reaction times aren't nearly as slow as we thought they were, and you guys can withstand high G at the rate of a 30-year-old. But here's our summary of you. We've determined that you could shoot down the first 4 enemy MiG fighters off the ground in the morning, but then you'd have to go home and take a nap. So, Now, I've come here tonight to tell you a little bit of my story, and I hope perhaps by the time I'm finished that it may have some benefit for some of you. I'm not a theologian. I'm not a preacher. I'm here to tell you my story, and I hope perhaps that it may have an effect, and you may be encouraged or motivated by the time I'm finished. As you might imagine, aviation has occupied a major share of my life. In fact, aviation began for me at a very early age. You can believe this or not, but I knew what I wanted to do at the age of 5. It was during the Depression years, back in the 30s, and my parents were like a lot of people back then. They didn't have much money. We lived in Southern California in a little town called Van Nuys, and my dad was a little better off than some. He was able to afford a half-finished 2-room house. And about the time I was 5 years old, why, my mother had an occasion to be away for a couple of weeks, and my dad was left with me, the 5-year-old, and a whole lot of things that he had to keep doing. Now, my dad's a very creative guy. He was able to do a multiplicity of things and look after me at the same time. And he did very well till about the middle of this 2-week period when he made a mistake. He decided to finish roofing the house. Now, being a creative guy, he devised a unique method for looking after me and doing that at the same time. He took me up on the roof with him and nailed the seat of my pants to the roof. And ladies, I want to tell you, a 10-penny nail is a very effective babysitter. Now, his idea was that the nail, of course, was to keep me from sliding off the roof, and he thought it made me a captive audience, and that he was going to instill in my young mind some practical education by my watching him shingle this roof. Well, what the poor man didn't know was he bought this house right under the final approach to the local airport, and I spent the entire afternoon watching airplanes fly overhead, and so strong are those images, those pictures, I can still see them in my mind's eye. And thus began my love affair with the airplane. And I did like every other kid. I built model airplanes. I read everything I could get my hands on, and every now and then, well, I'd sneak away and go to the local airport, hang over the fence, and watch the real thing take off and land. And things went along marvelously till I got into my teens, and I began to make noises about learning how to fly. And boy, that's when things came to a screeching halt. I suddenly discovered that both of my parents were terrified of aviation. They'd been putting little roadblocks in my way all along, and I'd not recognized this. So we had some outright arguments over this new thing that arose, and I wasn't about to give up. So finally a compromise was arrived at, and I was allowed to work after school at the local airport as a line boy, sort of an all-purpose grease monkey. In fact, so important was the compromise that my dad took me the first day I went to work. And he stopped at the entrance to the airport and pointed to a sign beside the road. And he said, now you understand, your mother and I have agreed to this with a specific understanding that you do not avail yourself of what's written on that sign. Sign said flying lessons, so many dollars an hour. And I was learning to be legalistic and devious even at that early age, so I agreed. And I said, yes, sir, I agree not to spend any money on flying lessons. And I didn't. I just took them in compensation on Saturday mornings, and that way, you see, no money changed hands, and I thought I was being honest in doing that. And in those days, while you could learn to fly and solo and get your license at an early age without a lot of regulation and without your parents' consent, and I did all that. It took me about 1.5 years, and my parents didn't know. And the only mistake I made was that the day I got my private license, I decided to celebrate by buzzing the house. And somehow or another, my mother knew who that was. And now you've heard of teenagers being grounded. I'm a living example of a teenager that was literally grounded for 6 months. And the family arguments began all over again, and the strife that went along with them. And I guess finally, with the wisdom that only parents can have, why this thing would not go away, and they realized it. So they allowed me to continue my first love. Now, this is right after World War II had ended. And I knew that I wanted aviation to be my life's work, but I didn't know how to get into professional aviation. Now, there were a couple of things that occurred about that time. It was a little more practical that helped me. I found out that the They had just restarted the National Aerobatic Championship competitions after the war had ended. And every year down in Florida where they held these competitions, and the best pilots in the country went to compete. And whoever won that thing was really Mr. Somebody in aviation. And I figured if I could begin studying aerobatics and get good enough someday to be able to compete in those competitions, and then by some miracle one day win one, why, that would be a major stepping stone into the area of aviation I was interested in. So I began studying aerobatics. And again, my parents didn't know. And about 3 months later, I was out in the practice area one day at about 3,000 feet, practicing 8-point slow rolls and other aerobatic maneuvers. And my dad happened to be driving along on the ground underneath that area, looked up, saw this airplane, and somehow or another he knew who that was. And we had the grounding thing all over again and family arguments. Now, I wasn't terribly swift on my feet in those days. But I did notice that right after my flying became public, as it were, in the family, why, a change was occurring in our annual family routine. Every summer, during the 3-month school vacation, why, we were now being uprooted from California and taken back to Oklahoma, to my grandparents' roots. Now, my grandparents were pioneers in the state of Oklahoma. They went in with the land rush of 1889 and homesteaded large sections of land around Oklahoma City. In fact, my grandfather established the first dairy in the state of Oklahoma. Wasn't any tremendous empire, but it was a marvelous place for a city kid like me to be able to ride horses, you know, and swim in the streams and sleep out under the stars with your saddle as a pillow. And after I'd get over my peak of having to leave aviation for 3 months, why, I got to love these summers. I got to meet all the family clan, all the aunts and the uncles and the cousins. And early on, I had identified a rather strange aunt. I don't know if you've had a weird relative or two in your family tree, but I sure did. And this woman did weird things. At least they were weird to me. She prayed out loud before she ate her meals at dinner time, read her Bible right out in front of everybody, went to church 2-3 times a week. Well, those are strange things to me because they were missing in my growing up period. My mother and father were fine moral people, but apparently there just wasn't time for that in our family. Oh, we went to church maybe once a year, you know, to be kept from being called heathens in the neighborhood. But that made this woman terrifying to me. I was always afraid someday she was going to corner me and pour religion down my throat or something terrible like that. And so I stayed as far away from her as I could until the last summer I went back. I had just graduated from high school, and I went back one last time, and she succeeded in cornering me. And I thought, oh boy, here it comes. And she sat me down and began to talk to me, not at all about what I was afraid she was going to. She had a quality known as wisdom. I didn't know much about that word. And she began in this wise. She said, you know, if you're ever going to amount to anything in this profession you've chosen, you ought to go on to college, get a higher education, get an aeronautical engineering degree. Well, I was ready to reject that out of hand because I already had my number one educational objective, and that was to go to Florida and enter the aerobatic competitions. But before I could get that out of my mouth, why, she dangled a carrot in front of me I couldn't resist. She said, if you'll go to college, I'll pay for the first year's room, board, and tuition. So I thought, wow, what a deal. I should have known better when she already had the college picked out. But nonetheless, why, that September, I found myself standing on the campus of a small college in Arkansas in the Ozarks. And after I'd registered and went checked into the men's dormitory and got settled in my room, I decided to go out and explore the campus. And the first thing that happened is I was walking along the sidewalks. I ran into a bunch of nuts carrying Bibles under their arms, and I knew instantly that my aunt had betrayed me and that I had fallen into a hotbed of religion. And I turned around and marched back to my room, determined to pack and leave the next day. But a strange thing occurred that evening. Little by little, I ran into 14 other guys of the same ilk I was. They too had been conned into coming to this nut house just like I had. And they too had been out walking the sidewalks, seeing the same sights I had, and were more or less coming to the same conclusions. And you know how birds of a feather sort of flock together. I think we'd all found each other by about 2 o'clock in the morning. And we decided it would be much more fun, instead of leaving, to stick around and form a club and see what kind of devilment we could create for these nuts and for the faculty of this institution. And that's when my college education really began. I began to learn things you wouldn't believe. Most of them weren't on the school curriculum, by the way. First thing I discovered was, I discovered that mistakes that organizations and people make. In fact, that became my major. First person I discovered who made a mistake was my aunt. She had put the entire year's worth of room, board, and tuition in cash in my hands. She was a wise woman, but not too smart. And you know, money does strange things to people. And it sure did to me. Opened up whole new vistas of opportunity for me fact, I began a research program in my newfound wealth, and I discovered several things, and you're going to kind of have to stay with me. These are all kind of connected together. First thing I discovered was that in those days, you could buy a pretty advanced Army training aircraft, war surplus, for about half the amount my aunt had given me. So I made a snap decision. I decided I'd pay for the first half of the year's room, board, and tuition. We'd let the second half worry about itself when it got here, and I bought one of these airplanes. Now, a motivator for that was that I found the college had made a mistake. They owned an airport, which happened to be right down at the bottom of the hill the campus was located on, and they didn't know what to do with it, but I did. And so I brought the airplane there, and now I had the basis for a dual educational pursuit, the continuation of my study of aerobatics and the pursuit of a college education. And I thought I could get away with both of them. Now, I should pause to tell you, by the way, that there is some method to this madness I've been telling you about. Those competitions go on to this day. They've been greatly advanced. They're an international event now, an Olympic event. In fact, a very great deal of good has come out of them for aviation in general. But in those days, it was relatively simple. Each pilot that wanted to compete would develop a series of aerobatic maneuvers, and when he'd perfected them, why, he'd present them before a board, and if he was found to be competent, why, he could enter competition. And I'd been working hard on my series of maneuvers. These maneuvers are very difficult to learn. They're even more difficult to perform the competition level, so I didn't want to give up, as I said, all the hard work. However, I was running short of cash about this time to buy fuel with in particular, and that spurred further research. I wished I had patented this. You're looking at one of the first individuals, if not the first, that's developed a system whereby you can modify an advanced aircraft engine to run on automotive fuel. And the thing that motivated me to do that, of course, was the shortage of cash to buy fuel with. And in my research, I discovered another major organization that was making some mistakes. Found out the state of Arkansas was leaving a variety of vehicles around unattended on weekends that were used for road work. And now you laugh. Fuel's very necessary if you're going to fly airplanes, believe me. And I converted the 14 friends of mine into what's known as the Fuel Brigade. And I suddenly had all the fuel I needed for my number one educational objective. Now, the guys in the Fuel Brigade, by the way, were getting paid back for their duties by riding in the back seat with me when I would practice my aerobatic maneuvers. And after I'd finished my air work, why, whoever was with me in the back seat, why, we do what we call a little recreational flying. And I found out early on that in the Ozarks are rather uniform rolling hills and are forested. And you can fly through the ravines below hilltop level and treetop level in the Ozarks for a rather extended period of time. It's kind of fun till you run into a dead end. And that caused me to invent the airborne version of the game of chicken. Now, the way you play this game, flying through the ravines, when you come to a dead end with two guys in the airplane, two sets of controls, whoever grabs the stick first, pulls above the treetop level, is the chicken. I used to win at that game, but I wound up putting green stains on the bottom of the airplane doing it. But it was during the game of chicken one day that I had my education, formal education, advanced for me. It's funny what you can learn in college. I'll pass this on to you. I guarantee you this will increase some of your knowledge, especially if you've got a farming background. Did you know that a cow can outrun a horse? I discovered this quite by accident one day. And coming out of a ravine, instead of a dead end, there was a large pasture in front of me, populated with a variety of horses and cows. And I want to tell you, a properly motivated cow will outrun a horse. There's just something about a Pratt & Whitney R1340 aircraft engine coming out of it at 150 miles an hour does strange things to the psyche of a cow. But at any rate, as I said, why, we were thoroughly enjoying college. And I was pursuing my dual education. Now, in competition, there's a very important maneuver. It's called the entry maneuver. The very first maneuver performed upon leaving the field where the competition is held. First impressions are always important, particularly here. And I developed a low-altitude, very violent, but very spectacular entry maneuver that I was going to use. And it went like this. After doing the run-up at the end of the runway, I'd taxi around, line up with the runway, take off and climb to about 25 feet. And at this very low altitude, I'd retract the landing gear and the flaps and accelerate out to the maximum speed that I could reach, pull up vertically, and do a vertical snap roll at about 500 feet and push over and sort of disappear off into the sunset, as it were. Now, it had two purposes in those days. One was I got to practice the maneuver every time I left the airport. And the second was that it kind of developed into my signature. Groups of students and faculty would gather on the college hill to watch this amazing display. Students loved it. Faculty had other thoughts about it, but nobody had any doubts to who was leaving the airport when I do this. Now, the other maneuvers, of course, as I said, I practiced out away from the college campus. Until one day, as we were beginning to enjoy college, I ran head-on into an individual that had all the characteristics of my aunt. And the way that happened was, by the way, somebody had discovered that I was not taking a required course in this college. I thought I'd gotten away with it, but they found me out, and I had to start taking this course. Guess what the title of it was? Bible. And the individual I'm referring to was the professor of Bible. And I always sat way back in the back of his class. And the instant class is over, well, I had to escape out the back door. So one day I was escaping out the back door, and there he stood. And how in the world he ever got from the front of the class to the back that quick, I'll never know. But he collared me, and I thought, sure, he discovered some major infraction I was guilty of, but not at all. He invited me into his home for dinner. Said he and his wife would like me to come to their home one evening, and I wasn't fast enough on my feet to think of a good excuse, so I agreed. And the time came, and I went, and they were a cordial couple, of course, and dinner was marvelous. And afterwards, he invited me into his study to talk. Now, I knew pretty much what he was going to talk about, and I was prepared to turn him off. But there were two things that prevented that. They might be worth remembering for some of you. After we were settled in his study, it suddenly dawned on me that for the first time in my life, I was confronted with someone outside of my immediate family that cared about me, and it showed. And the second thing that struck me, because I had secretly begun to admire this man, he was a very knowledgeable man, a very capable man, not at all like I'd envisioned a Bible professor to be like, and he had taken the time out of his busy schedule to talk to me. And I'd never had anybody do that before. And so I decided to listen, at least for a little while, and even that bowled me over. I wasn't prepared for what he had to say. I thought he was going to talk about religion, but he began on this wise. He said, you know, you're in an institution of higher learning. And sooner or later, you're going to be confronted with a course that will teach about origins, the origins of the universe, the origins of mankind, the origins of the earth and all living matter. And he said, I studied these subjects some time ago, and I'm going to give you a little bit of what I learned in those studies. He said, after studying these subjects for some time, I came to the conclusion that there are only two basic things behind all of this. And those two conclusions are these. One is that eons ago, there was a cataclysmic explosion from which all the universe was formed, all of the heavenly galaxies that we see, and the earth. And through a process known as evolution, why life forms began on the earth, and ultimately mankind. And we are what we are today because of a process known as evolution. And he said, the other position holds that there's an almighty, all-knowing, all-capable God who created the heavens and the earth, and man in particular. And he said, after leaving these studies, I went into the study of the related sciences. And as I began to study the sciences, little by little, I saw unfolding in front of me the evidence of design, enormous power, cohesiveness, the evidence of a creator. And he said, after a time, I came to the conclusion that somebody had to be behind all of this. And one of the things that drove me to that conclusion was a single word. He said, it's the only word that can adequately describe the subject of evolution. And that word is accident. And he said, I could not reconcile what I had begun to see and learn in my study of the sciences with the evidence of the genius that was there. All of the millions of things that occur every hour in this body to keep it working and all working together with the word accidental. And so I came to believe that indeed there is a God. And he went on to describe to me how that God in the beginning had created man, and that man had disobeyed God in the beginning. And because of that disobedience, he was separated from God down to this day. But that God desired a reconciliation. And at that point, he introduced me to someone I had only known in a profane way up to this night, Jesus Christ. And the minute he mentioned that name, I became very uncomfortable. And he, being a wise man, quickly described to me who Jesus Christ was, how that he was God, and that he took upon himself the form of a man. And he accomplished a work so matchless that it resulted in a way for man to find his way back to God. Well, not being, as I said, a wise man, he didn't go into much more detail or spend time on theology, which he knew I didn't understand. And he let me off the hook, as it were, and we went to the front door, and before I could escape out into the night, he said, there's one more thing. He said, I know you're nervous, and this may make you more so, but my wife and I care about you, and we've been praying for you. And perhaps you've never had anyone pray for you before, and as far as I knew, I hadn't. And he said, we're going to continue praying. We're praying that God will bring you face to face with a very scientific fact. The fact that you're going to leave this life one day, that you're going to die, and that you're going to stand before this God I've been telling you about and give an account of yourself. But we're praying most of all that before that day arrives, you'll come to know this Jesus Christ I've been telling you about. Well, he knew that I couldn't comprehend all that he was talking about, and he let me go, and I escaped out into the night, went back to staying just ahead of the campus cops. By the way, that's what we call the faculty, and not doing anything too outrageous, and keeping my grades above red line, and pursuing my dual education. Several weeks later, one of the individuals in my 14 friends, by the way, I should have told you, there were 3 other pilots in that group. They weren't quite as far along as I was, but they all knew how to fly and had pilot licenses. And this man began to bug me to check him out in this airplane. He'd never flown an airplane as complex or as advanced as this aircraft was. And since he was the head of my fuel brigade, I think I couldn't find a good reason to say no to him. So I put him in the front seat, and I flew with him for several hours, training him until he became proficient in the aircraft. And the day came to soloing. And we went out to the airport. We did our walk-around inspection of the aircraft. I helped him on with his parachute. We got up on the wing, and I watched him strap in and go through the start procedure, tapped him on the shoulder, and I got down off the wing and watched him taxi away. He got down to the end of the runway and did the run-up and the pre-flight checklist just like I trained him, turned around, lined up with the runway, took off inclined to about 50 feet, leveled off, retracted the landing gear and the flaps, accelerated out to the maximum speed that he could reach, pulled up and tried to emulate the maneuver that he'd ridden with me through so many times before. And at about 500 feet, he lost control of the airplane and pitched over and dove straight into the ground at about 150 miles an hour. Now, I had never seen death before. And to say that I was a shocked young man is a gross understatement. I'll never forget that day as long as I live. But I wasn't shocked enough that my education didn't move forward again in ways I'd never dreamed that it would. It hit me like a runaway freight train that I was responsible. If anybody belonged in that pile of smoking wreckage, it was me and not my friend, and I knew it. Another thing that struck me that day, and this too might be worth remembering for some of you, it hit me that somebody had been following me. And I never conceived that anyone would ever want to emulate me or do what I did, but it was very evident to me that day that somebody had been following in my footsteps. And for death, I had absolutely no answer whatsoever. I went back to my dormitory room after the events of that day and locked the door. I got down on my knees beside my bed and I tried to pray. I'd never prayed before in my life. I didn't know how to pray. And the only thing I could do was cry out and say, "Oh God, what's happened to me today is too great for me to bear. I can't handle it." And somehow, a formal prayer came to my mind. I learned it in the Bible professor's class, and I cried that out, and I said, "Oh God, be merciful to me, a sinner, and save me for Jesus Christ's sake." That night I discovered there is indeed a God, because he answered my prayer that night, and he changed my life. And it hasn't been the same since. Let me be quick to say, I don't declare that I'm perfect, not at all. But God intervened in my life that night, and I knew it. And the next day, he performed a miracle for me. This may not seem like much to you, but the very next day I had a sudden desire to begin studying the Bible. To me, friend of mine, that was a miracle. Because if you'd have told me prior to this day I'd have ever had any interest whatsoever in studying that book, I'd have laughed in your face. But as I began to study the Bible, I came across a verse in it sometime later that described what God had done for me that night in answer to that prayer. And that verse in the Bible says that if any man be in Christ, he becomes a new creation. Old things pass away, and behold, all things become new. And that's surely what God had done for me that night. There were a couple of misconceptions I had about this being a Christian. I'd heard that word. Of course, since coming to this university, I didn't know what it meant. I thought that in order to become a Christian, that meant I'd have to become as good as my aunt. And I knew I couldn't hack that. Or that I had to attain to the level the Bible professor was on, and I knew I couldn't reach those heights. I didn't realize that no one can live a life commensurate with that which is required of God to be united with him. No one can forgive his or her sins on their own. No one can change their nature or attain eternal life on their own. These are the things that Jesus Christ accomplished 2,000 years ago on the cross. And because it's impossible for man to do these things for himself, it's provided as a free gift. It's the only way it can come. Another misconception I had about this being a Christian, I thought that if I ever became a Christian, that meant I'd have to become a preacher, or I'd have to become a missionary and go off to some foreign land somewhere. And I didn't know what those professions meant, and they worried me a great deal. But God did not do that with me. He's allowed me to go on and achieve every dream I've ever had as a boy. Oh my, and then some. Several years ago, I was selected as a project test pilot for an advanced weapons system. That weapon system has been used recently in Desert Storm and in Iraq afterwards. Most of you have seen it in television. It's been very effective. Thousands of people have been involved in the development of the system, several aerospace companies. It was a cooperative effort. And when the prototype units were finished, why, we were boiled down to a little 200-man test group, myself and 2 other backup test pilots. We converted an advanced jet fighter into a test bed and installed the system in it. And the day came to fly for the first time. I went out to the base at about 5 in the morning and suited up and briefed and strapped this fire breather on, sat there on the ground and operating the system and telemetering the data to a variety of receivers around where people were analyzing it. And after we were all satisfied that the system was operating properly, why, I started engines and taxied to the end of the runway. After a last-minute tweaking, why, I took off inclined with about 30,000 feet and leveled off. In the interim, the sun had come up. And it had turned into one of these picture-perfect days, the azure blue sky and the puffy white clouds. And I had about 10 minutes to get to the test area where I was to begin performing the first series of maneuvers that were printed out on the test card strapped to my knee board. And I had time to reflect. And again, my education ran over me like a freight train. It hit me that right this instant I was living every last dream I'd ever had as a boy. As a boy, I'd watched the movie Test Pilot that had starred Clark Gable and Spencer Tracy. And it fascinated me. I went to see that movie, I think, about 100 times. I almost memorized it. Clark Gable never flew an airplane like this one, though. They'd never conceived of the technology I had on board when that movie was made. Boy, did my education move forward that morning. Do you know what I learned? The dreams, when they come true, are not all they're cracked up to be. Now, please don't misunderstand me. I take this message around the country, all over the country. I have a hard time with this because I don't mean to put down dreams. They are indeed the stuff of life, and we are to pursue them. But there's some of you here tonight that have been running 100 miles an hour down the road after dreams. Some of you have been doing it for years. Would you take it from one who's had a lot of them come true, that unless God is the author of those dreams, you have a tragic disappointment awaiting you? They will not satisfy the way you think they will. You know, when we dream them as young people, why, we surround them with a golden sheen, and we think that when they come to pass, either all or in part, why, they're going to be an end-all to end-all and satisfy that deep longing. But when they do come to pass, why, there are problems attached to them, difficulties that we hadn't thought about. And as I was sitting there contemplating all of this, why, it occurred to me, you know, when Clark Gable did this, he had the strains of the New York Philharmonic Symphony Orchestra playing in the background. I had sweat running out of my helmet, clear down to my G-suit, and I wasn't looking forward to all of what I was going to have to do with this airplane in the next hour and a half. And boy, suddenly dreams were just not all they were cracked up to be. Another thing I learned about dreams that morning, they're over with just about that quick. I don't know about you. I think everybody here tonight's had dreams come true to one degree or another. Have you noticed? You can't hang on to them. They're transitory. Well, I know some of them last a little longer, but if you're wise, friend of mine, you'll understand they're going to end. I have a couple of test pilot friends that are older than I am. They're both retired now. One of them's done a great deal more in this profession than I have. And they're sad men to be around, at least they are to me. It's over. And they both know it. And they're both frightened of the future. And if you let them, they'll sit there all afternoon and talk to you about the good old days, trying to relive just a little bit of it. And it occurred to me one day, what a tragedy to arrive near the end of your profession or the end of your life and be frightened of the future and only have memories. Do you know people like that? I'm 76 years old. It is as much a phenomenon to me as it is to you that I'm able to crawl into the cockpit of that jet fighter and go do what I do. Sometimes I have to have help. Getting in, that is. I tell my grandkids, by the way, I can't run as fast as they can anymore, and I can't throw a football as far as they can, but I'm still their worst nightmare at 20,000 feet. I appreciate the applause. You're not going to like the next one very much. So I look out there and I see a lot of you, by the way, that are in the same category I'm in. You'll never see 50 again, just like me. You either put some on or you color what you got left, or you put on jewelry or pretty clothes or anything you can to hide it. Oh, I hate to tell you, some of you failed miserably. Even with the lights, I can tell there was at least 100 that said that wasn't funny at all. But have you noticed? Have you noticed how fast it went by? I don't know where she is, but it was just yesterday when I married this beautiful lady, my wife. Just yesterday when we were having our first children. Just yesterday when I crawled over the cockpit of a jet fighter for the first time. Oh, friend of mine, the Bible says that the length of a person's life is but a mist. It appears for a little while and it vanishes away. But boy, do we get hung up on this world. We dig roots as if this life was going to go on forever. May I remind you, friend of mine, God did not intend for us to stay here. And yet we act like it. We build houses as if we're going to live in them for 300 years. We fill them full of knickknacks. We spend most of our time trying to create a little heaven here on earth. How do I know that? Because I spend that time too. Oh, but friend of mine, what a marvelous and wondrous thing it is to be a child of God, to have Him save you, to have Him redeem you. There's a verse that I have because I'm probably going to wind it up this year. As I shared with you, it's a series of miracles that have kept me at it this long. But I can't do this for much longer. But it does not spell the end. It spells the beginning. I learned another verse that's been precious to me. I hope it is to you. That verse in the Bible says this, that eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor has it entered into the heart of man, the things that God has prepared for them that love Him. Amen. Forgive the vernacular, friend of mine, but you and I see nothing yet. Not long ago, I was asked to take the aircraft that I'm currently flying and do a unique program. Program's the heart of my talk. There's a mission that's classified, and I'm sorry I can't tell you what it is. It's been quite a while now, and we've done a number of these programs, but this one was a classic. The primary reason in the studies that it was found wanting, because it was found wanting, it's been on the back burner as far as priority is concerned for a number of years, but now in light of what's happened in the Middle East, why, for some peculiar reasons, it's been advanced considerably in priority because of what we see coming down the pike in new combat situations. Primary reason it was found wanting in the studies is that the aircraft that these young men who fly the mission have been flying are obsolete and are not capable of performing the old mission very well. And now they have a new high-performance profile they're going to be addressing. And they need a new high-performance jet fighter. And I was privileged to be asked to be the pilot to demonstrate this new profile because the aircraft we're testing fits the mold that they're going to be getting into. So I was asked to take the aircraft and my team and go to a secret base out in the West and spend 2 weeks giving 18 young pilots that had been selected from around the bases who fly this mission and brought there. They were the top guns, if you will, of this mission. And they were brought there with their support groups. And we were all gathered together in the base auditorium on a Monday morning. And the commanding general for this mission was up on the platform giving the introductions and the agenda. And I was sitting out in the audience. And while the general was going on, just 4 chairs down from me was a young major that had been selected as the temporary commander for the young pilots during the demonstration phase. And he leaned over and was talking to one of my associates. And he said, "Who's the test pilot who's going to give us the flight demonstrations?" And my wise guy associate said, "It's the old guy sitting 3 chairs down." And I guess the major figured I couldn't hear so well, so he persisted and said, "Well, is he going to need help out to the airplane every morning? And did he bring a cane with him?" I let that go in one ear and not quite out the other. And when the general finished, it was our turn. Now, we were concerned about this program. We felt we hadn't been allowed enough time to prepare these young men for what was coming. Primary reason we were so concerned is that not one of these young men had ever flown a frontline jet fighter. Ever sat on a state-of-the-art 00 rocket ejection seat or worn half the equipment we wear, much less flown in this environment. So we were concerned that we hadn't been allowed enough time. But they wouldn't relent, and in fact, they had flying to begin the very next morning. So we went well into the evening, and I wound it up. And I pointed to the young major as I wound it up and said, "You're up first tomorrow morning, 0700 briefing, 0800 at the airplane." So the next morning, we suited up and briefed and went out to the aircraft. And we always give to pilots or air crew members that we feel haven't flown in this caliber of airplane or in this environment a last minute, I'll call it an emergency briefing. It's really a critique to be sure they know what our emergency procedures are, what our dialogue will be with the ground stations, and what the seat operates like, and et cetera, et cetera. So having done all of that, we got on board. I started the engines, closed the canopy, taxied to the end of the runway, took off and climbed out to their practice area. Now, this new profile in demonstration form is about 30 minutes long, And if you've seen the movie Top Gun, we do every maneuver you saw in that movie, plus a whole lot more. A lot of our maneuvers are vertical in both directions, with entries between 5 and 7 positive G, with rapid reversals to 2 and 3 negative G. We wind up doing 600-mile-an-hour evasive tactics, 100 feet off the desert floor. Conclude with a pop-up maneuver. We enter that at 5G, go vertical, pull into an inverted position. We have an instrument that presents a menu of targets. We select one, roll in on the target, do a simulated attack on it, come off of it, do 2 victory rolls, and we're done. And if you haven't been doing that every morning after breakfast, I guarantee it'll uncage your eyeballs for you. So I slowed down from warp 7, and the young major in the back seat was white as a sheet and had filled up 2 bags, and landed, taxied into the Revette, but shut everything down, opened the canopy, and he had to have help to get out of the back cockpit. I'm not done yet. We got down on the ramp. I couldn't resist the cap story. I leaned over and said, "You want to borrow my cane?" Man, some of you love revenge. After we had flown all 18 of these young pilots during the 2-week demonstration phase, we did an evaluation of the program. This is the first one, as I said. And we learned some things we didn't think we would. There were 2 things in particular that stood out that are applicable to why I'm here tonight. First thing we learned was that not one of these young men was prepared for what was coming. It was a terrifying experience for each one of them. And the second thing we learned had to do with the first. The primary reason we felt that they were so terrified is that they thought they knew what was coming. You see, they were pilots. They knew the technology. They'd had the briefing materials in their hands for weeks. Some of them had even seen combat, but not one of them was prepared for this. And I realized I'd just been given a tremendous illustration. That's the reason I'm here tonight. You see, I've come here tonight to brief some of you. Now, I know this is a group made up largely of Christians, but I can't assume that. You see, I'm privileged to speak to a lot of secular audiences. I'm thrilled that I'm able to do it. I'm able to get in where no preacher, no evangelist would ever go. I spoke not long ago to the U.S. Air Force Space and Missile Command on the National Day of Prayer, which nobody understood. They opened with a Buddhist, by the way, praying, and I gave the same message. They gave me a standing ovation after I was finished, and the 4-star general, who was a commander, stood up right beside me. He had tears in his eyes, and he turned around and he said, "You blew me away. I've never heard these things before." And I thought to myself, my, what an application. I've come here to brief some of you that know the Lord Jesus Christ. I have 2 groups that I want to talk about first. First group, by the way, bothers me a great deal. There's some of you here that are like the young pilots in a certain way. You see, some of the things we learned about the young pilots is that they've grown complacent. They've grown comfortable with the airplane they've been flying, with the mission profile they've been flying. Some of you are like the young pilots in a more important way, by the way. You become comfortable in a spiritual cocoon. You've gone to church for years. You've sung the songs and prayed the prayers. Or perhaps you're married to a Christian spouse, or you have Christian children or Christian parents, but you yourself have never come face to face with the issue of your own relationship with Jesus Christ. I know that because I've met many of them. What a dangerous place to be. I don't know a lot about you. You frighten me. If you've played at church or been playing as a Christian, oh, friend of mine, I urge you to listen to the last few minutes of my message. The other group, I know a lot about you. Somebody conned you into coming here tonight. You can't wait till I get done. And what I'm talking about is really off the wall, and you don't want to hear it. I know exactly how you feel. I've been there. Shortly after I went to the school, I was telling you about a girl who invited me to a prayer meeting. She was pretty. I didn't know what a prayer meeting was. I thought some kind of social event, so I went. When I got there were about 20 students praying one after another around the circle. Didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out they're eventually going to get to me. And I hadn't the foggiest idea what they were doing. I wish I could have crawled under a table. Oh, friend of mine, if you're here tonight in that condition, would you give me just 2 more minutes? This is the most important thing you will ever address in your lifetime, bar none. I'd like you to remember as a test pilot that told you that, not a preacher, not a theologian, but somebody out of the secular world. I deal in worst case scenarios, hard data. This is a piece of hard data. 2,000 years ago, a stupendous thing happened on this earth. The creator of the universe took upon himself the form of a man, and he walked amongst us, and he shook the world, and the world hasn't gotten over him since. You can't write a check today without acknowledging him. When you put the date in the upper right-hand corner, you acknowledge his birth date. There are many who will not recognize him. What a tragedy. They call him the great physician or the great teacher, and they try to link him with the great men of old. Oh, he certainly was all of those titles and many more, but he didn't come to accomplish any of those things. He came for a much greater purpose. He came to redeem you and I. He came to reconcile us, to restore us, and to use a word we've made shameful today, he came to save you and I. His name was and is Jesus Christ. In the whole history of the world, there has never been anyone like him. I was greatly moved by the two theologians, preachers that spoke last night. What a tremendous thing to have looked and understood. I've looked at it from a different way because I'm a pragmatist. As I said, I deal in worst case scenarios, hard data. Oh, friend of mine, may I say to you, in the whole history of the world, there has never been anyone like Jesus Christ. There isn't anyone that can compare with him. I've looked at the data. I've looked at data that's come across my desk that no preacher ever sees. And I want to tell you, all of it adds up to the fact that he indeed was the creator of the universe. There is no one that can compare with him. Search the history of the world over. You can find no one that's ever lived the life that he lived, uttered the inviolate truths that he uttered, performed the miracles he performed, declared that he was God, and nobody dared challenge him. And then he laid down his life willingly and knowingly as a ransom to purchase your eternal future and mine. And because it was not holden of him, he rose again. And he sits this moment on the throne of the Godhead. And he offers to whoever will receive it forgiveness of sin, eternal life, a new nature, a relationship as a member of the family of God. Christian friend of mine, may I remind you who you are? Charles Spurgeon once said, oh, I love that man. Of course, he's dead long ago. English preacher, shook the world also. Tuned to be the greatest preacher since the Apostle Paul. Declared that if the average Christian knew the creature that lived within, that God had put there, and for a moment God would draw back the curtain and let him see that image, he would be tempted to fall down and worship it. What a contrast to fall down and worship yourself. That's what God has placed within us. One day it will be revealed and made real. We are indeed the child of the living God because he has indeed paid for us and paid our price. I close with two stories. The first I aim at you that know the Lord Jesus Christ. Several years ago, I flew a jet fighter from a military base over to a civilian base. And when I arrived over the area, it was all socked in with weather. And I called approach control and began to get radar vectors, so what we call an ILS approach, and was busy doing that, having descended into the clouds, and was talking to the radar controller. And all of a sudden, a new voice came over my headset. It was the senior controller, and he said, we have an emergency in progress, and you're the only one we can look to that might be able to help. There's a small aircraft up on top of the clouds. He's low on fuel, he has no instrument rating, and he's terrified, never flown in the clouds. And we wonder if you might be able to go and do something to help him. And I said yes, and I climbed back up, and with their radar assistance, after a few minutes on top of the clouds, this little dot showed up in my windscreen, and I pulled around behind him, lowered the landing gear, extended the flaps, and opened my speed brakes, and almost had to open the canopy and hold out both hands to slow down to his speed, and pulled up on his left wing. Fortunately, I had a radio that had his frequency, and I keyed the mic, and I said, look to your left. And he turned and looked out, and he saw this beautiful jet fighter sitting on his wing, and he broke into tears. And I said, listen, all I want you to do is calm down. I'm going to pull out a few feet ahead of you. I'm going to turn every light I have on. And we're going to make a few practice turns, real slow. And all I want you to do is when I turn, you turn. And I'll look to you. I'll see to you don't lose me. And we made some practice turns, all of them designed to get lined up with the final approach course. And then finally, after we'd practiced a little, we descended into the clouds. And I told him, you'll see it get misty for a little while, but don't worry, I'll still be able to see you, and I won't let you go. And we just descended and broke out at about 400 feet. And there in front of us was the brilliant strobe lead-in lights and the twin runway lights. And I can't tell you the emotion that man had when he embraced me. And it occurred to me sometime later that I had just been given another tremendous illustration, and I give it to you as a challenge. I realized suddenly that I had in my hands the controls of that jet fighter, the latest technology known to man as far as this technology was concerned. I had radios and avionics aboard that made a plaything out of this weather, and I was able to use it to bring somebody who was lost home to safety. And then it occurred to me, on a much greater basis, oh friend, you and I, as children of God, hold the very words of life in our hands. And on a much greater basis, I urge you to use what God has put in your hands to pull alongside of somebody who's lost and lead them home. To you, friend of mine, who may not quite grasp what I've been saying, I have this last illustration. Several years ago, we were flying a major relief program in Africa during the Nigerian Civil War. And the Air Force had loaned us, through some political contacts that we had, 4 giant C-97, Boeing C-97 and cargo aircraft. And I was flying one, a replacement aircraft, to the little island that we operated off, 300 miles off the Nigerian coast, and the island of Sao Tome. And I had on board about 35 different people, missionaries and mechanics, and a whole load of spare engines and parts. And my 2 teenage sons that I had wangled out of high school to take them on an adventure they probably would never see again. And we left the Azores and went nonstop 12 hours down to the island of Sao Tome. And as we got near the coast of Africa, why, everybody was asleep. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning, except me and my flight engineer. And I heard over my headset my call sign. And I answered it, and it was a discreet intelligence station in the Sahara. And they asked me to go to a discrete frequency, which we had on board because we had all the Air Force radios, and I did. And they said, we have 3 pieces of information to pass on to you. We just learned that the federal Nigerians have gained some MiG-19s. And the MiG-19 was no joke. It had air-to-air radar. And the second thing we have to pass on to you is that they last week hired a group of Egyptian mercenaries. And they too were no joke. They were not untrained like the Nigerians were. And the third and last thing we have to pass on to you is that they took off from Lagos just about 10 minutes ago, and they're on their way out to shoot you down. And we were about 200 miles off of the coast of Africa, fortunately in the middle of some thunderstorms. I woke everybody up, woke my co-pilot up, and gave him control of the aircraft, and went back before I told anybody anything, took my 2 sons and had the privilege of going behind the rear engine stand, kneeling down and telling them that for the first time in their lives, their father did not have the control of the situation, and that we might die. I can't tell you how hard that was. And we had fervent prayer, praying that God would see to our safety. And I went back up and took command of the aircraft again, decided to use our emergency fuel. We went out to sea and climbed up higher into the thunderstorm. And I don't know to this day whether they missed us by an inch or a mile. We burned up our reserve fuel. And our navigator had lost track of where we were, because he lost all of the sights that we had on the African coastline. We couldn't get high enough for him to take a star sight, and we didn't know where we were. During that last half hour, I had about 35 people up in a flight deck that held maybe 10. All of them looking at the 2 primary radar scopes we had. And I can't tell you the joy it was to see that little image of the fringe of the island creeping down from the top of that radar scope. We landed with about 10 minutes of fuel left. None of the gauges were even showing. And I learned another wonderful illustration. Oh, precious friend of mine, what it's like to have a destination. And I ask you, if you're sitting here tonight and you've heard my briefing and it's bothered you a little bit, I want to ask you, do you have an eternal destination? Are you, when you reach the end of life, and I want to warn you, it's coming. You know, forgive the humor, but I've got a 21-year-old brain running around this 76-year-old body, and it can't figure out how it got here. It happened that fast. And it's going to happen to you that fast. And I wonder whether you have a destination. A destination. I close with this. There's a verse in the Bible, in the book of Romans. In that verse, there's these words. Most of you know them by heart. That whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved. I'd like, friend of mine, if you've been sitting there listening to my briefing tonight and it's disturbed you and you've just realized that you can't answer the question that I'm about to ask you to ask yourself, I wonder if you would listen for the next seconds, 30 seconds, because I want you to ask yourself a question I believe it to be the most important question you'll ever address in this lifetime to yourself. And here it is. Have you ever called on the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and received Him as your Savior? That, my friend, transcends all the dreams, all the hope-sos, all of wherever you want to be in this life. That descends into the morass in comparison to the answer to that question, because, friend of mine, the answer to that question determines where you're going to spend eternity. I'm going to close my part of this program in a brief prayer. If you've been sitting there, and I know most of you know the Lord Jesus Christ, but for those of you who might not, or have been playing, as I said, or perhaps wandered in and this is all new to you, I want to give you the opportunity of calling on His name. And this is how I'm going to do it. In a brief prayer, I'm going to repeat the same prayer that I prayed as a young man so many years ago. And if you can't answer that question in the affirmative, I want you to call on His name by repeating that prayer with me, word for word, silently in your hearts. Would you all bow your heads? Father in heaven, I thank You for the greatest gift this world has ever known, Jesus Christ the righteous. I pray, Father, there might be some here who've never called on Him or just realized that they never have, that You'd move them by the means of Your Holy Spirit to say with me, "Oh God, be merciful to me, a sinner, and save me for Jesus Christ's sake." And I pray, Father, that if they did that out of the depths of their heart, that You would indeed cause them to realize that You've just moved them out of eternal darkness into eternal light, and that You've forgiven their sins, and more than that, that they have an advocate to walk through the remainder of this life with, that can answer those unanswerable questions and fill that aching void. For these things I ask in that most matchless of all names, the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. I have one last thing to say, by the way. We have a table. I'm sure all of you have seen it. We started this ministry just a few years ago when so many people came to us saying, "Oh, we have a son or a daughter who flies or works on airplanes, and we do wish that they could have been here to hear it." This same message is on all of those tapes. The videos have some of my flying scenes in the history. Just before we came here, someone called us that had seen that video, and they gave it to their next door neighbor who was a World War II pilot, an avowed atheist. They'd tried to witness to him for years. They gave him the video and said, "Would you do this one thing for us? Just watch the video." 2 days before we came, they called us and said, he watched it 8 times and he just asked us to come over. He had tears in his eyes and he said, "Would you please tell me how to become a Christian?" It's a ministry. Thank you very much.
All right, Brannon Howse back here with you. You can see now I wanted to bring this special presentation to you tonight. Mr. Russell O'Quinn, 76, speaking at my Worldview Weekend 76 or 78. What I think he said 76, but he passed away in April of 2022. April 2022 at the age of 93. They've restored one of his airplanes recently. You'll find it online if you search his name. And they're working to put some of his planes in his different articles about him and different things from his career in a museum in Palm Springs. So Russell O'Quinn, our vault is filled with presentations like this. And we're going to bring these out from time to time and share with you. We're getting great feedback tonight. Logan said the numbers are really good, people watching tonight. So apparently there are people that are interested in something like this occasionally. You know, if I had to sit and do politics every night, the Republicans versus the Democrats, the left versus the right, the globalists versus the nationalists, not that those aren't important topics, but if I had to sit and do that every night, this job, this occupation, this calling would be very frustrating and futile. Because in the end, you know, we got ourselves very, very emotionally involved, many of us, in the administration of Bill Clinton. And it came and went. We got very emotionally involved in the administration of George W. Bush, and it came and went. We got emotionally involved in the administration of Barack Obama. And while these things are important, what's going on now, as went on in the Biden administration, now the Trump second administration, while these things are all very important, and we shouldn't be pious about them and act as though we're above them all, because we're not. And these are real worldview issues. If it's just simple discussions of politics or geopolitics, at the end of the day, none of this is going to matter. And that's why we got to keep bringing it back to the spiritual, to the biblical, to the Christian worldview, to evangelism as well. And of course, many people do evangelism very well, but then they don't seem to know how to teach people how they should think or live after that. And so we have to have both. And that's what making disciples is about, evangelizing them and then talking to them and teaching them about how we apply the Bible to all issues of life. And so tonight you heard a guy that was his passion, to take what's common to the culture, turn it into a pulpit, work in an occupation in the sciences and aviation, but also speak to generals and civilians alike. So this is what we do here. You just got a little taste of what a National Worldview Weekend is like. And you'll get a taste like this at our upcoming one coming up Friday night, October 3rd, Saturday, October 4th. But for those who wonder why we took the time to do this, we could have played anything tonight, just on a rerun. But we have to keep bringing it back to these things. Because if at the end of all of the years and years we've done this, if all we're remembered for is he had a good program where he talked about the politics or economics of the day, that really isn't going to impact too many lives. But if we can take what's common to the culture, the concern about our country, the interest in how we oppose globalism, understanding the rise of Marxism or Islam, if we can take these things that are of interest to people and then also bring the Christian worldview and the truth of the gospel to the forefront, now we're doing something. And I have to tell you, our audience is growing. It just keeps growing. And there are a lot of people that listen to our broadcasts, that watch our broadcast, that never would go to the doors of a church. And today, of course, finding a good church is becoming increasingly impossible for many. And so we've been given a great opportunity. And there's one thing about our network that's really shocked me, and that is the number of people that will watch and that will listen, that will then write to us and say, I'm not a Christian, or I'm an atheist, or I'm agnostic, or I'm more into New Age spiritualism. But I really enjoy listening to when you talk about the Bible or when you teach your class on Revelation. Some say, I don't know really what I am. I'm just interested in what you're saying and teaching on the issues of the last days, the book of Revelation. And it is of interest to me that they keep listening and that they're concerned about these spiritual things. And this is really what sets our network apart from so many other networks. And that's by design. This is not by mistake that we're different. It's by design. So, yeah, we talk about politics and economics and law and history and all of those topics, and we want to apply a Christian worldview to them. But I have to tell you, we also are trying to bring in people with that as the hook and then give them things like you heard tonight. And there's nothing wrong with doing that, taking what's common to the culture and turning it into a pulpit and an opportunity. And maybe what you heard tonight, as I was listening with you, causes you to reevaluate, to really think about what at the end of the day is really important. And then also, maybe it also causes you to maybe not be so stressed out about all that's happening in the world. Again, not that we should be pious and above it all, because we're not, but to understand that there is a greater plan. Everything is not falling apart per se. As it's been said, it's really falling into place. And it is overwhelming when you consider all the things that are happening right now, that have never occurred in all of world history. And yet those things are all happening right now at the same time. What's going on in the Middle East, what's going on economically, the nations that are making military and economic alliances together that have never done this in world history, the red heifers that they have shipped off to Israel, the desire of the Jews to build a temple. Even though I'm not looking for that, it does give me a marker of where we're at, I think, on God's calendar. The rise of the Antichrist beast system that would allow for the Antichrist system. All of these things, I could keep going on and on about all the things that are happening. They're all happening right now at the same time. What are the statistical odds that all these things would be happening right now for the first time simultaneously in human history? If not for the fact that this is laying the stage for the events of the Bible to come to pass, which then I think should cause us to be concerned about what was said tonight by Mr. Russell O'Quinn, and to be sharing with our family and friends the truth about the gospel. Because at the end, that's all that's really going to matter. And we won't be arguing politics or law or science. All that will matter is if your name is in the Lamb's Book of Life. So I think it's great to reevaluate. I think it's great to get regrounded, refocused. And I think that's what we were able to do tonight, listening to Mr. Russell O'Quinn. And it just helps maybe some understand what it is we're really about, what our goal here at Worldview Tube and Worldview Weekend and Worldview Weekend Foundation is really all about. And that's it. This is our long history. That had to be 2007, 2008, somewhere in there. I'll go back in our files and I'll be able to tell you. But we've been doing this a long time, and we haven't strayed from our organization mission. So what's intriguing to me is that we haven't strayed, and yet in these days and times, you would think there are a lot of people who would be turned off by this. And yet more and more people are turning us on. And I think that's because since COVID and all the things that are happening, more and more people now are asking very serious questions internally. And now they're finding an organization and a broadcast that's addressing them. And that's what we're going to keep doing. And with your help, we can reach more people. So thank you for telling all of your family and your friends about our network. And we'll continue to broadcast our normal schedule, but also work in things like you heard tonight to keep the main thing the main thing. And if you do appreciate what we're doing, we do need your support. And you can do that through our foundation, worldviewfoundation.com, worldviewfoundation.com. But I do hope a lot of you still will register. It's not too late. It's about a month away. Memphis, Tennessee, outside of Memphis. We're not in Memphis, so don't worry. We're outside of Memphis in beautiful Collierville, Tennessee. We'd love to have you join us. You got a little idea of what it would be like. See how big our Worldview weekends were. Now, we're not running that big anymore because of the fact that many people can stream them now and stay at home and watch them. And you can do that through our vault. But to be honest with you, a lot of our people that attended our conferences, many of them are too old to attend anymore, and many of them have passed away. And I must say, we are having a harder time attracting younger people that want to come to a Friday night, all day Saturday conference like we have now. It's not as common for people to want to take in something like this anymore. They want to do it on their iPad. And I understand that to a degree. But there's nothing like being together at the same time, the same place, And if you've attended one of these, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't and you do attend this year, you'll know what we're talking about after you leave. And many people put it down for years as an annual event, and it was kind of their spiritual retreat to get recharged up and go back into the fight. So I hope a lot of you that can will join us in person Friday night, October 3rd, Saturday, October 4th. And again, you can get registered at worldviewstore.com. But again, we don't want to exclude those of you that maybe financially cannot afford to travel here and get a hotel, or you are not physically able to travel here. So we don't want you to miss out. And that's why we are making it available through our vault as well. worldviewtube.com/vault. If you're a member at any level, monthly or yearly, worldviewtube.com/vault. Spread the word about the event for people to attend in person. Spread the word for them to watch it online. It costs many thousands of dollars to put an event like our annual Worldview Weekend on. And a few years ago, I announced that I thought that would be our last one, and people didn't like it. And they said, please don't stop. Please consider keeping going. So we have. But the only way we can justify continuing to go and do these is whether people attend online or in person, because we need to pay for the honorarium of every speaker. We need to give every speaker an honorarium. Their time is worthy of their being compensated. We've got to pay for their flight, their hotel, a car rental. And when you add that up with all the speakers and then rent the building and then feed them when they're here. And when you add all that together, folks, that's many thousands of dollars just to try to break even. And so if you appreciate the fact that our organization, on top of all the other things we're doing, is continuing to take this on as a burden, and it does stress us out. It does, because we're spending a lots of money to put this event on, and we're thinking about our normal monthly budgets, and then we take this on still. And that's why we've thought several times, let's stop doing that. It's just so expensive to do. Let's just stop being stressed out about how many people are going to attend, how many people are going to stream it online. Let's just be done with that stress and cost. But people have demanded we keep doing it, and we think it's important. And it's something we want to do if people support it, either being there in person or streaming it. So please consider doing one of the two and spreading the word about it, because there are not a lot of organizations holding Christian Worldview Weekend conferences, Christian conferences built around the issues of the day and then bringing a biblical perspective without compromise. Not many left. And it's very challenging in this day, in this age, in this world to put these on. These were much easier events to organize and put together. As you saw the size of that crowd at the end, when the camera pulled out, you could see how big that crowd was. We filled that auditorium in Branson, Missouri many times. There were times we had chairs going down the aisles. We had to bring out chairs, 2,300, 2,800 people. That we had much easier time filling these events years ago, but there seems to be a lot of people that have grown cold. A lot of younger people today just seem to have no interest or no time for these things. And maybe that's why we need to keep doing them, even if we then turn around and at times offer them up in bits and pieces and small clips and put out all over social media to try to continue to use that as bait, if you will, to draw in more fish for the harvest, or evangelizing them. So there's a lot we can gain from doing these, not only during the events, but using the presentations again for years, like we just used that one tonight. So again, the only way you can keep doing that is if you support it. And that means you either attend in person or you stream online, because we've already booked the building for next year, for the next Worldview Weekend in 2026. We've already booked the building, and we'll be announcing the city that we're going to next year. But we got to get this year pulled off first, and at very least break even. So please consider that, worldviewstore.com or worldviewtube.com/vault. Now, we would love to take this presentation and put it back up online for you guys, but it does go into our vault. So if you want to see this again or share with friends, do get a membership of the vault. From time to time, we'll pull some things out of our 35-year archive of presentations and air them like this. But otherwise, they stay in our vault, and you can access them through a membership there, as well as be able to stream many events. Not only the event coming up in October, but we'll have with us Catherine Austin Fitz in our studio with us here October 9th. And 1 hour will be live on radio at 1 o'clock Central. The next hour will be for Vault members only. So again, a lot of benefits to being a member of the Vault, and it's a good part of our general operating budget as well. All right, so there you go. There you go. We've got a Brannon Howse Live done a little bit differently than we normally would. I didn't have to put on a suit and tie and everything else. Maybe I should do this every night, Logan. Just come on in my blue jeans and open collared shirt. I am wearing a vest, by the way, though, still. But we'll be back with our normal schedule Monday. Tomorrow night, Shahram Hadian is going to be sitting in for me. So he's got some great guests lined up. Logan was talking to him earlier this evening about everyone he's going to have on. So he'll be sitting in tomorrow night. So be sure to tune in 7:30 Central, 8:30 Eastern for Brannon Howse Live with guest host Shahram Hadian. Thank you guys for all your support, your prayers, your concerns. And I wasn't even planning on jumping on here at all tonight, but too many emails, too many texts, people all worried. And I appreciate the fact you guys worry, but we're good. And you keep praying for us, and listen to Shahram tomorrow night. And we'll be back at our normal schedule with a busy fall kicking off next week. It will be probably pushing right on through Thanksgiving. So again, this will be a little bit of a reprieve for us on Friday afternoon and evening to be together as a family, but also a lot of administrative stuff I need to take care of today and tomorrow. So then we'll get ready to have a real long push for the rest of September, October, into November. So thank you for everything you guys are doing to help Worldview Tube keep going, particularly again through our foundation, worldviewfoundation.com. All right. Thanks for listening, folks. Take care.